Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing WDx, I'm joined by Marra Francis, board-certified OB-GYN and advisor to multiple early-stage diagnostics companies. We unpack the shocking reality behind women's health research, including why women were excluded from clinical trials for decades and why many diagnostics we use today were originally tested only in men. We also discuss the opportunities for founders, investors, and innovators to finally close the data gap in women's diagnostics. If you want to hear one of the biggest blind spots in healthcare, this is an episode you need to hear. Welcome to the show this week, Marra. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good. Where in the world are you?
I'm in San Antonio, Texas.
Lovely time of year to be in Texas as well.
Yes, it's great.
I'm excited today because we're on our new topic of diagnosing women's DX, a topic that needs more attention, and I think that the more awareness around the current realities of what women have to face and the lack of data behind a lot of decisions is really alarming. So I'm excited to talk about it. There's probably nobody better to talk to than you about giving us some insight into women's health and diagnostics specifically. So I think the first thing we should do is hear who you are, your background, your career, and everything you've been up to.
Sure. Yeah. So I am still a board certified obstetrician gynecologist. I did my training in New York City at NYU's downtown campus. And then I actually went straight into private practice in Texas after residency. But I have held several leadership positions in early stage diagnostic companies over the past 10 years. I'm currently a clinical advisor to several emerging companies. And I'm actually a volunteer faculty for the Catalyst program at MIT, which is, a great program bringing new entrepreneurs into the biotech space.
What drew you into the private sector when you made that shift, and I guess more specifically the world of diagnostics?
Um, I always say I didn't become a doctor to work in industry. That was never my goal. I know that's the goal for some people, right? They'll go into medical school, get an MBA, and they know that that's their path. That wasn't my path. Industry found me. I trained in New York City, but I practiced in Texas. And, I practiced differently, I think, because of the training that I received. And so industry found me, right? When I was first in private practice, I was doing private cord blood banking with my patients, but really nobody else was. And so a company in private cord blood banking kind of came knocking on my door and said, "Who are you and what are you doing?" We haven't had any private cord blood collections from the Houston area ever. And then a couple of years after that, I had another company come knocking on my door and say, "What are you doing? How are you testing all these women for a BRCA mutation? Like, you're an OB-GYN." So the way I practice sort of brought industry to me. And then I saw an opportunity, right? I saw a need and an opportunity for companies to actually be speaking to practicing physicians, and not necessarily academic physicians, right? Because academic medicine tends to be very different than community medicine. And community medicine and community care is where the bulk of Americans get their care. So it was an interesting opportunity for me to sort of give a voice to the community physician in industry. And then I just learned that I enjoy it. And I learned that I have a unique way of thinking about how products will not only fit into the existing clinical care pathway, but benefit the patient, benefit the provider. How can you add true value, and what are you going to need to move the dial and actually drive adoption?
When you were practicing, were you sort of aware of the testing and data available to women and its shortfall, and what, was it concerning to you at that point? And also, were you aware of the research and development and the sort of novel science that was coming through that was yet to hit the market, that was going on in the private sector?
To some extent, yes, right? You attend women's health conferences, and there's the hall of tables with industry talking to you about what's new and what's novel and what's great. So there's that aspect of knowing what's out there and what's emerging. But I think as you're practicing day to day and you're seeing women with conditions and you're experiencing the frustration of, I don't have a test that can just diagnose this. I have to go based on, a process of exclusion. I can exclude this with a test, and I can exclude this with a test, and I can exclude this with a test. So if I've excluded all of that, then the only thing that's left is this condition that there's no test for. So you're constantly facing the struggle of not having the tools at your disposal that you need to adequately diagnose or care for a certain condition that affects women only.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned you're currently, as part of a group, you're also involved in a lot of early stage diagnostic startups at the moment and trying to help new science come to market. So what's the role that you're currently performing, and what are you currently involved in?
Yeah, so currently I'm an expert consultant for Tiger Team Bio, which is sort of a multi-specialty consulting group out of the San Francisco area. I think we're unique in the sense that everyone on this team has early stage biotech startup experience. Most of us can list a number of companies where we were, higher number 10, 11, 12 in that company. Um, and the other thing that's unique about us is we all really enjoy that early stage. So we like the small companies. We like a little bit of a blank canvas, right? You've got proof of concept, or you've got, a product in its infancy. Where do you take that? And how do you take that, and how do you create the value that you're going to need as a startup to be able to secure funding as you go forward?
Mm. Makes sense. I think, the early stage part of the industry seems to be the most in need, has been for a while. Doesn't matter if it's from great advisory and access to those people, or if it's on the capital side, which still seems to
Right.
be one of the biggest
Right.
shortfalls in the industry.
Right. And we see year after year companies with great potential products, great ideas fail because they run out
Yeah.
of money.
Yeah. There's a lot of science sitting on the shelf.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. So let's specifically talk about the women's diagnostics experience that you've gathered whilst in the private sector. Where have you been, and what have you been involved in with regards to women's diagnostics, the science and the testing?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I started out really as a key opinion leader for Myriad Genetics. And, obviously, when I started with them, we were able to test for BRCA1. And then that expanded to BRCA1 and 2. And then we had BRCA1, 2, and BART. And then eventually we had a panel of hereditary conditions that can affect men and women. But obviously, for me, I was taking care of the women, and that was really my start. I worked with Aspira Women's Health on a pelvic mass triage test. I had a really great experience working at Everlywell. And at the time when I joined Everlywell, they had 3 panels available to consumers on their platform. And when I left, we had 33.
Wow.
And what was fantastic is I was able to help build out not only the diagnostics that were specific to women, but all the content, right? So all of the educational support and the results and how the results would look and what we would explain to women about their test results, and sort of the customer support that we would provide. So that was a fantastic experience and a totally different side of industry, right? Consumer based is very different than if you're going down the traditional role of, LDT and insurance coverage. So that was a great experience. I was at Semaphore when we were expanding uh, the market into obstetrics and gynecology for expanded carrier screening, which previously had only really been in reproductive endocrinology and infertility. Um, and then from there, really, it was just a whole bunch of consulting with small startups. I was at a startup that was in a consulting con, position, looking at being able to triage women more appropriately than a screening mammogram can if they've got dense breasts. So,
Mm,
really trying to fill the gap of missing abnormalities in a screening mammogram because of the breast density.
mm.
And then from there was with a company that was going to launch into women's health, but unfortunately, we ran out of funding before that happened. And then most recently was with a company that's still in stealth, so I can't really talk about what they're working on, but solely women's health diagnostics.
Fantastic. And so, before I actually ask my next question, the Everlywell stuff on the consumer health and I mean wellness, I kind of call it as well, right? And the huge push. Um, we've heard this across many of the podcast episodes. The amount of people who are now want data in their own hands, take control of their health, and all these kind of things. Has that side of the industry helped push forward the access and R&D of novel science and given more options, or is it about bringing consumer stuff that they would normally go through a physician for, or is it that actually that industry has helped to bring new science to market?
I think it's helping.
Mm,
I had the privilege of working with Stephen Friend at the For You and Me company, where it's research and it's novel research.
yeah.
And I was part of the BUMP study, which is the better understanding of the metamorphosis of pregnancy. And it was completely decentralized. And it was women who came in pre-pregnancy and then shared their biometric data with us through pregnancy and did questionnaires with us and talked about their symptoms. And then we were able to look at that aggregate of data and try to model trends that might indicate that there could be an unwanted pregnancy outcome, or there could be the development of a pregnancy associated condition. And that was purely consumer driven. And so I think we're seeing that there may be this environment where people feel more comfortable doing clinical studies that are outside of what we think of as traditional industry, outside of sort of the clinical trials that are registered on clintrials.gov, right? Studies that they find organically from friends, they find it organically from websites that they frequent for information. And I think that there's, in especially younger generations, sort of almost a trust that, you know, no one's asking me to do this. I'm doing this completely voluntarily on my own. And at least for the For You and Me, the data is free, right? Like they're not withholding that data and they're not monetizing that data in any way. They want people to take this real world data and use it to understand and to ideate on and to improve the health for women.
Yeah, that's interesting. In the wellness side of it, there's obviously a speed to market, speed to commercialization, and also not an avoidance, because that's not the right word, but maybe a lack of regulatory hurdles that has to be faced in that side of the industry. But obviously that doesn't stand up if you. We see a lot of lawsuits now, right, around are you providing low
Yeah.
risk data, or are you providing diagnosis and so forth, and so
Yeah. I think it really depends on the company that you're talking about, right? Like, I mean, I can speak for Everlywell. I can't speak for a lot of companies, but we even at Everlywell, we saw a lot of copycats kind of come and go. And we saw a lot of people with websites that were up and maybe they had no business doing what they were doing. And maybe they weren't doing it in a supportive, constructive way. And I think that those type of actors
They get
tarnish.
found out. Hmm.
Yeah, and they luckily they get found out and they're usually gone pretty quickly, but they sort of tarnish this idea that you can provide quality testing, you could provide valuable information so that someone can access information about their health whenever they want, not when it's ordered by a physician, and it can be trusted.
Right.
And I will say Everlywell did it by far, I mean, to the letter of the law, and had all of the support needed. Followed every state regulation for ordering laboratory testing, and went above and beyond with the after result support, especially for tests that are more on the diagnostic side and more on the severity side, right? So we had Physicians Wellness Network be our disclosure of some very sensitive test results. HIV testing, right? That is a test result that you should not just be able to click your email and see a result without anyone there to help you through that
Right.
understanding.
Yeah, interesting. Trust is the big word, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people have actually turned to these types of platforms because they suddenly started to not trust, going to a physician, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I don't blame them, right?
Right.
I mean, when you have venture capital generating ROIs off of the care of individuals, right? It's going to make patients question, who is
Sure.
this provider serving? Are they serving me, or are
Mm.
they serving the person who is invested in and owns their business?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Women's diagnostics, obviously there's some history here in terms of the the lack of data and compared to male populations and so forth. But would you mind giving us a bit of an insight into your perspective on the history of women's diagnostics versus what sort of where it really should be?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, women's diagnostics, as we know it, and dedicated women's health research, really only began in the 1990s. And so the history of that is, in 1977, the FDA created a policy that excluded reproductive age women from phase 1 and phase 2 trials unless they had a life-threatening condition. And this was a sort of a knee-jerk reaction to the thalidomide story, where women were taking a very early antiemetic drug called thalidomide, and it had devastating effects on the fetus. But what's really scary is that policy remained in place from 1977 until it was finally overturned by Congress in 1993. So we have decades where, we had virtually no representation of women in clinical studies. And you'd say, okay, great. But before 1977, no, before 1977, there was minimal representation of women in clinical studies.
Right.
So we don't really have good data, right? Like, if you think about it, the richest source of data is from the Women's Health Initiative, which was started, I think it was 1991 that was started. So we're talking about relatively small numbers of years in the big picture of health research where
Yeah.
women have been included. And even now, right? Like, what does included mean? I mean, we still make up less than half of trial participants, and women of color are even less represented. So we're not we're nowhere near the amount of information that we have on men that we need on women. We're nowhere near what we need to be balanced.
I feel the 90s, maybe because of my age, feel like modern times. Do you know what I mean? Like that feels like yesterday.
I mean,
And
think about it. 1993 is when that FDA policy was overturned. And nobody was enrolling reproductive age women before that. And it wasn't like 1993, the policy was overturned and a switch flipped, right? People still had to get comfortable with enrolling reproductive age women.
What is the knock-on effect of that then in reality? Like for a an adult woman going through the trials and tribulations of life and the things that they're going to come up. Are women navigating adult life with just no line of sight on certain things and just
Oh, yeah.
hoping? Do you know what I mean? Like what does it really mean in reality?
So in reality, let's take a condition. I'll take two conditions. I'll take a pregnancy condition and I'll take a non-pregnancy condition. So a pregnancy condition, right? Preeclampsia. Preeclampsia is the number one killer it's the number one reason for maternal mortality worldwide. It
Right.
kills more women in pregnancy than any other condition, any other experience, any other negative outcome. We, A, still don't know what causes preeclampsia, and B, don't have any effective treatment for preeclampsia beyond delivery. We have a lot of emerging diagnostics for preeclampsia, but all I can do is offer that woman a low-dose aspirin a day during her pregnancy, and then when she develops preeclampsia, if she develops preeclampsia, deliver her baby. So I don't think we're going to move the needle on maternal mortality for preeclampsia until we have a therapeutic for preeclampsia that will prevent it or that will cure it. But who's going to take the risk of running those trials, right? You're going to have to either simulate pregnancy in a lab, or you're going to have to run the risk of doing a clinical trial on a pregnant woman. So we have these major gaps. And even if we get diagnostics, what does that mean? If we don't have therapeutics to effectively give women for preeclampsia, what does the diagnostic really do? So that's the pregnancy condition where I think it really illustrates massive gaps. But a non-pregnancy condition that illustrates massive gaps is autoimmune diseases, right? The ratio of women to men for autoimmune diseases is 4-1. We don't know why. We have theories. We think maybe it has something to do with the X chromosome. We think maybe it has something to do with hormones. We think maybe it has something to do with changes in hormones. Nobody knows why. We have correlations, but we don't have causation. And until we understand why women are afflicted with autoimmune diseases so much more than men, how could we effectively treat them? So, I think that those are very real illustrations of just the long-term ramifications of excluding women, and in particular, excluding pregnant women from any type of clinical study.
I was pretty baffling, to be honest. So on the autoimmune side, based on what you said about the clinical trials, which I understand, is like how do you run a clinical trial on preeclampsia without running that there's a huge risk there.
Right.
But on the autoimmune side, are clinical trials ongoing for better therapies, or actually are better studies going on in terms of data being validated for diagnostics, and actually we feel like there's a great chance to really catch up over the next sort of 5-10 years in being able to find potential better causation on the autoimmune side in women?
I would say yes, both. There are companies working on better diagnostics for autoimmune conditions. There are companies working on better therapeutics for autoimmune conditions. However, when you start thinking about money invested and money
Yeah.
returned, right? And you start thinking about market size, when you talk about conditions that are only experienced by women, you've got 51% max of the population, right? And
Yep.
again, 100% of women don't get autoimmune conditions. So you're
Yep.
talking about a fraction of half of the US population. And that can sometimes be a hard sell to investors, right?
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of why we may not see more um, growth in conditions that are growth in knowledge, growth in innovation in conditions that are affecting women only.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have colon cancer, and colon cancer affects men and women, right? Now you're talking about a percentage of the population, but the whole population. And so that market, is much larger and much more appealing to investors. So I think that we have a lot to do on defining value um, before we're going to see real big changes in conditions that affect women only.
So as we sit here today on that point of defining value, have we progressed in, say, the last 10 years in that there is more interest and ultimately capital, whether it's investors, whether it's founders wanting to start more specific companies and bring science to life, but it is the interest and activity of new diagnostics coming to life, or are we still in the same place we were maybe 10 years ago, where we're just not doing enough? Or are we seeing an uptick?
It's we are seeing an uptick, and you will read the headlines and you will see the numbers. 30% increase in investments and
Hmm.
conditions affecting women. But at the end of the day, we are talking about single digit percentage increases when you think about overall investment and capital investments, right? Um, we are not, we're looking great because we're going from nothing to something, right? So that looks really good. But, at the end of the day, 4% of clinical trials that are registered with clinicaltrials.gov are for targeted gynecological conditions. 4%. So yeah, maybe we're investing more in these companies that are trying to solve problems for women only conditions, but it's nothing. I mean, it really, at the end of the day, it's better than nothing, but not much.
Right. Yeah. What needs to happen then? What's going to push us forward from here? How does the industry move forward, and ultimately the standard of care improve?
I think there's been a lot of work in trying to get people to understand why investing in women's health is a good investment. And these statistics are known by everyone and they're spouted by everyone, but 85% of consumer spend is from women, right? So if you want your economy to continue to thrive, it's probably a good idea to keep women healthy. Women occupy 50% of US jobs. Okay. If you want, again, the economy to continue as is, and you want people to be able to put food on the table, it's probably a good idea to invest in women's health. Women utilize 33% more healthcare than men. So you can look
Hmm.
at that as, okay, why? Why are women utilizing 33% more healthcare? It can't all be pregnancy. Not every woman is pregnant all the time.
Hmm.
Um, you know, that's clearly a statistic that begs two sort of sides of the coin. One is we should not have women requiring more healthcare than men
Hmm.
overall by a third, right? Like something is lacking. And why is that? But more importantly, we're spending more for healthcare on women. And all we talk about is trying to decrease healthcare dollars spend, right? Like we spend so much on healthcare in this country, money that could potentially be put elsewhere. We can't decrease that spend if we don't increase and improve the health of women so that maybe they don't need to utilize healthcare 33% more of the time.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, in terms of the diagnostic world,
Mm-hmm.
um, we've mentioned preeclampsia and the autoimmune side. Is there other clear gaps in what's available, or is it just across the board that that everything needs to be pushed forward, or is it even off to flip it? Has there been progress in recent years where we actually feel great about where something is right now that's really been brought to market?
Um, yes, there's progress. I don't want to sound like a complete naysayer that there's no progress, but when you look at the progress for women, right? We were starting from basically zero. No representation in clinical studies until the 90s.
Yeah.
Very little investment in women only conditions, right? So we are making progress. Um, this is going to be wildly unpopular, right? But we have a lot of diagnostics out there, and we have a lot of therapeutics out there that were only studied in men, and we use them in women. How do we know that they work the same in women as men? We don't. But if you're talking about people who have limited amount of dollars to invest in clinical studies and research, what is their motivation to take a drug that maybe is generic and figure out, does it even work in women? Right? Does it work only in women of a certain age? Does it only work in menopausal women, but not reproductive age women? Because maybe the estrogen is interfering with the way the therapeutic works. So I don't know how we would ever even fill those massive gaps. I don't. And we may not. And it may be that we just sort of have to start from today, and we've got to focus on conducting studies for both diagnostics and therapeutics to see how they behave in women, to really build and back build some of the knowledge that we lack. And I think that we can back build, right? Like, I think that there's ways that we might be able to take data that we collect today moving forward and use AI to maybe fill in gaps for medications or diagnostics or anything that no one's going to invest in trying to figure out how they work in women. But maybe we can take some of the information we get moving forward and sort of backfill that knowledge and fill those gaps. What I don't want, and I've read a lot about this, and it scares me a little bit. I don't want AI gap filling women representation in clinical trials, which people talk about, right? They talk about using AI to gap fill underrepresented groups. And that scares me because if I'm a woman and I'm being offered a clinical trial with a certain inherent risk, but I know, well, they could just use AI and pretend to be me in this clinical trial. That is almost a disincentive to have underrepresented populations join clinical trials. So I think we have to be very careful about how we try and gap fill our knowledge, because we don't want to do anything that's going to inadvertently discourage women from joining clinical trials.
So the AI, so hang on. So with the AI gap filling, the concern could be that ultimately, if AI is working off huge data sets that and actually sort of using that to maybe average things out, which AI
Hmm.
loves to do,
Hmm.
then actually, whilst it's going to um, speed up, accelerate, create much bigger bandwidth, and be
Hmm.
able to sort of bring, hidden trends and data and everything else, right? But
Right.
ultimately, if we implemented AI today widely across all these clinical trials, and we're like, yeah, we can now get this done in a fraction of the time, we can produce more results, blah 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 blah, then actually what it might end up doing is putting this line in the sand where the women population of data was so small and never got the chance to catch up,
Hmm.
and therefore was never assessed. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying never assessed and disincentivized to join
Right.
in the future, right?
Right.
Um,
That's
Now,
really dangerous, isn't it?
I think it's dangerous. I mean, I think it can be dangerous if it's used in such a way that it's an either or, right? If it becomes an either or choice, I think that that's dangerous. I think that there is great potential in using AI for conditions where people are just afraid to do a clinical trial. Pregnancy might be the perfect place to augment our knowledge with AI, right? Because it's difficult to get a pregnant woman to enroll in a
Yeah.
clinical trial. And a lot of companies don't even want to go there. They don't even want to assume that liability. They don't want to assume that risk. So I think that that might be a place where AI could be very valuable. However, we still lack so much basic scientific understanding of the placenta, right? Like, there's still knowledge gaps in the basic science that need to be filled so that AI can do what AI needs to do. Because AI is only as good as the information that
Yeah.
it has, right?
Yeah.
So, I think my recommendation would be that we proceed, obviously, because there's value, but we proceed in such a way that it does not become a reason that women become more excluded from clinical trials.
Yeah. We need to up the attendance and recruitment of females to get more data to be able to act on in the future.
We're literally a century behind.
Yeah. Wow. This is you mentioned there's so much diagnostic testing ongoing at the moment that was ultimately, when it was approved and implemented, it was ultimately tested on a huge percentage of males in the trial period.
Yeah.
I'm a 40-year-old man. I'm married. We have 2 young children. My wife definitely goes to the doctor more than I do. What kind of regular testing is my wife probably getting on a yearly or 3-yearly basis at this age, that when this went through clinical trials was probably majority, maybe completely tested and tested, and approved based on male populations? Not to put
Well,
people off and say, well, just don't bother, that's just a waste of time, that's not my point, but
yeah.
I always think about, when I'm fascinated about these things, I always try to think about, you are a qualified OB-GYN. You know so much more than the regular person, 99% of people that walk down the street every day, living their life happily, and are just not aware of what actually is behind the testing capability that they are subjected to, and is available. That's where my head always goes. I always think, what do regular people think
Yeah.
versus what is actually
What's
being done?
actually happening. So pretty much any blood chemistry that you are receiving. Right.
Okay, quite a lot.
So
Quite
quite
a
a lot.
lot.
Right. So, it's interesting. Thyroid, right? So all thyroid normal levels were based on 70-kilogram white men for decades and decades and decades and decades. And it really wasn't until 2000s where people started saying, we have all these women who are so symptomatic of hypothyroidism, but their labs are normal, right? And if you talk to any woman, they will tell you the bane of their existence is, I go in with a complaint of a symptom and all I'm told is my labs are normal. Why is that? Well, because your labs were based on a 70-kilogram man, and very few of them have actually been pulled back and researched as to what would be normal for a 55-kilogram female. So any lab testing that you're getting historically, all tested on men.
That's wild. My sister had thyroid problems in the last few years, which ended up in surgery.
And
That's
she was probably symptomatic long before her labs became abnormal.
wow. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. So it's frustrating. And again, when you think about what it will take to fund a research study to understand what is normal, what is a normal triglyceride for women? How do we know it's the same normal that it is for men, right?
Yeah.
What is a normal TSH for women? How do we know it's the same or different for men? Who's incentivized to pay for those studies,
Yeah.
right? Certainly not the labs doing the test.
If a company is trialing new therapeutics now, I assume there would
Yes.
be FDA rules on
Yes.
diverse populations in place,
Yes.
right?
And I think that there are companies that recognize, and it can go one of two ways, right? So there are companies that recognize that the standard laboratory diagnostics based on 70-kilogram white men may not represent disease state for non-Caucasian individuals, may not represent disease state for non-male individuals. And I think that they have a real need for having a better diagnostic that is truly tailored to show change when they implement their therapeutic, right? Last thing you want is your study to fail because 40% of your participants were women and they didn't achieve a statistically significant change. Well, maybe they didn't achieve a statistically significant change because everything was measured in milligrams and it should have been, measured in a different amount because the values are smaller in women, right? So I think that there is definitely a need in certain situations. But I don't see people on a widespread level kind of stepping back and saying, are these values normal for women? Like, are they truly normal?
Yeah, makes sense. So you mentioned that the investment side is picking up, but needs more. And you did mention as well that there is certain awareness being made to the realities of the past and also the current workflows that exist for people, for women, sorry. And is that the way it needs to go? Is it about raising more awareness and drumming this home to try and attract more investment? Or is there other things that we should be doing to try and get more into the system, to especially early stage science, whether it's diagnostics or therapeutics?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that two ways. The first is every year that we get a new group of fellows at MIT Catalyst, I'm always rejuvenated because there's always several projects trying to identify gaps in women's healthcare. And that thrills me and excites me, right? Because they're going to be the new wave of startups. And I love that every year there's several projects focused solely on women's health. I love that. I think that's a sign of good things to come. I will tell you that the Nobel Prize started in 1901. To date, there have been 0 prizes awarded in medicine or physiology for conditions that affect women only. 0. That has to change. If that doesn't speak volumes to the lack of priority of women's health research and science, I don't know what does. I think that we need to be encouraging from early ages, even school age, right? And not in a politicized way, but just encouraging budding scientists, budding entrepreneurs to think about opportunities, big gaps, big opportunities where they can make a valuable contribution and a valuable difference. And we have to get people to think about, what does it mean when you think about a return on investment? Like, think about women in general and think about, what does that return on investment actually mean in a bigger sense, right? We need to think about the social ramifications of improving women's health. We need to think about the economic ramifications of improving women's health, things that are going to raise everybody up, not just the company that's doing the investment. I think investing in women's health is a no-brainer, but because I think everyone thrives when women are healthy.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. On that note, how are you looking at 2026 and beyond in terms of the future outlook and milestones that you're hoping to see in women's health and diagnostics specifically?
Yeah, again, investing in women-led businesses is less than 5% of all capital investment. I'd love to see that move. It would be great if we could get to double digits, right? I'm not asking for 50%, but 10% would be phenomenal. We do know that a lot of these women led companies are focusing on women's health problems. So it would serve women's health to invest in women-led companies. I think that JPM had a theme this year, women's health and longevity, and that was wildly popular. I think that that's a sign of good things to come. We have a lot of novel startup companies out there that are really focused on women's health and very vocal about it, right? More importantly, we've got biotech startup companies that are challenging social media
Mm,
algorithms
mm.
that selectively remove words that pertain specifically to women's health conditions. That also has to change, right? Not only do we have a lack of information in general, but now we're restricting information women can find on the internet or on social media because we've taken words out of algorithms. Words like menopause, words like menstrual pain, words like vagina, words like sexual dysfunction. Like, we're pulling words out that only affect women. Not sexual dysfunction, but it doesn't matter. Like, words that would be combined, knowing that it's women looking for women's health. And we have companies that are actively combating that. And that's great, right? Like, how are you going to know if there's a gap if you can't even find the word on the internet, right? Or you can't find a group on social media working towards a community for women all experiencing the same negative outcomes. So I like that, and I think that that's a good sign of things to come.
Good to know. Well, hopefully Diagnosing Women's DX will help put these companies in the spotlight and
I hope
tell
so.
their story, get their brand out there, and if we can help to attract investment to the space, then that'll be something to tell the children, won't it? That's the key.
I have
I've got
5
two
daughters.
daughters, so they
You have 2 daughters?
yeah.
I have 5 daughters.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
So, and I have a granddaughter and a second granddaughter on the way. So trust me, I am very invested personally,
Yeah.
professionally, in improving the health of women. Because I got a lot of them coming after me.
Good, yeah, good for you. 5. I don't know if I could do that, but yeah. Marra, honestly, this was absolutely fascinating. I actually think that this is probably one of the most, or probably the most, sort of stats that have just blown my mind. I've never been sort of, taken aback by so many just like almost ridiculous, unbelievable situations for women's health and women's
I
diagnostics.
mean, the
And
Nobel Prize. My God. We've never had a Nobel Prize for anything only related to women's health.
yeah, utterly ridiculous. But thank you so much for coming on and shining a light on it and taking the time to do that, because it's awesome, and we'll certainly help to get this story out and all the future stories as part of this series.
I'm so excited.
All good. Thank you so much, Marra.
Thanks, David.